Welcome everyone, Grandmaster Dr. Thor Templar here, your only voice of gnosis on the planet, guiding you through the feces-infected world that we live in. What I'm going to cover today is an important topic that often comes up and needs to be clarified yet again. And that's to be more specific about sexuality and the occult sciences in particular, and how the occult scientist looks at sexuality and how it can be used magically, etc. There's an awful lot of fables going around about that, and I've talked about this in a kind of a general way and talked about Tantra and all the other different sexual practices within magic in general, and you can look for those audios to clarify some of those areas, even though I will repeat some of the general information here. But I want to make a definitive audio on this particular area and get it done and dusted, so to speak. And it does come up often, and people think about this whether they're not expressing it or not. And, what is the value of sexuality in general? Is there anything to celibacy? Is there any power in the human orgasm, the fluids, etc., etc.? And this is an old part of occultism, particularly old pagan practices, which seem to have been very much based in a lot of sexual practices. Further brought back to the public in the 1960s through Wicca with Gardner, Gerald Gardner, the British I guess he was a customs agent in Hong Kong, who then claimed to have met somebody and was a friend of Aleister Crowley and put together a Wicca system using a lot of sexuality and a lot of personal preferences, such as bondage and whipping and other things, which are very common and in British life where he is from, one of the probably fetishes that are common there. But in general, he put in a lot of his own sexuality and cut out a lot of other things that for one reason or another he didn't want to put in there, a lot of oral sex things, other things, etc. But, of course, that got changed in the 80s when basically the lesbians took over Wicca and made it into a non-sexual thing, and the male homosexuals made it into a sex party. One of the problems with what's happened to Wicca, and of course in the pagan movement in general, there's a lot of alternative people, and there's a lot of alternative, and there's a huge amount of gay and homosexuals in general. If that's your thing, that's your thing. It's not positive or negative. It's your sexual, basically, compulsion, and we'll talk about that as well. So, all these sexual sorcery and all these paths and everything else is a waste of time. They produce absolutely nothing. It's just a way to have a sex club like the OTO and other people do, who take you from masturbation to heterosexual to the highest level, which is homosexuality, whether you're homosexual or not. And hide behind some sort of Gnostic, bizarre mask. But, anything that the filthy scumbucket Aleister Crowley got into, that loser, Satanist, homosexual, put his fingers in, turns into the crap it is, dying a drug addict and penniless. The only reason he was able to survive in his decrepit, filthy practices and his perverse ways is because Daddy left him a lot of money from who, ironically, was a hardcore conservative Christian father who made his money from booze, which is even ironic on top of ironic. But As we look into these areas, it's important to get this clarified once and for all in what this is. And, there's so many things that people want to equate into magical practices because it fulfills some need of theirs to justify their activities. And one of those within the magical community is let's get loaded, man. Let's take peyote and LSD and, let's get into these all hallucinogens. Because they want to trip. And that follows up usually with a whole bunch of things, and usually most of those things are connected directly to sexuality because when people are messed up, they're able to be sexually used, taken advantage, or it's part of the ritual, man. We gotta fuck for hours after we take the drugs. So, it's all part of the little game of the unempowered, the weak, and the stupid who want to take the lower base emotions which serve no one except the ape people of this planet and move them into their own personal sexuality. Now, it appears to be pagan groups were very sexual, and this was part of the practice and understanding, particularly in pagan times. And there are many, many cults or pagan religions that had major sexual components to it, as we have today with so many other pagan religions, particularly out of India, which have sacred temple prostitutes. It just shows you nothing really ever changes. And the different sexual practices within all these. I mean, most higher systems tell you to refrain from sex because it has a problem with what you are thinking and acting. And there's all sorts of problems with sex in general, which we'll talk about. And sex is pretty much an enslavement from the ape being realities that are stuck within you to cause you all sorts of problems in life. And there is basically very little magical benefits from it. Pretty much there's no magical benefits from it. Now, the energy section, which is of your body from the Eastern religions, including Asia, has this area, of course, where your sexual energy is then taken, which is built in you whether you want it or not. And you take it, you move it around your body and other things and use it for proper purposes because that chi center, the root chakra, is where all that energy is. So you do that. And the problem with moving energy from the root chakra is you are moving sexual energy, which is hooked up to violence and caveman ape activities. So the whole idea is when you move energy from the bottom up, which is very typical Asiatic, you run into all sorts of problems. And generally, it don't work too well. When you did it from the top down, from the crown chakra, and you start moving down, uniting in a reverse kundalini effect, you reach very high states of gnosis and consciousness. And of course, that's what you want to do. We've all seen how nothing stops the sexual compulsion, the self-destructive, psychotic urge that sexuality is. We see this how people ruin their entire lives for virtually what are seconds of so-called pleasure, and for what reason? So the whole idea is that when we come to the actual use of sexuality and magic, there really isn't. There's no way to use that energy properly unless you're taking that root chakra energy and moving it through your body, which, as I've just discussed, has some very negative and problematic areas of it. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, sexuality. Let's cover what really sexuality is all about. I mean, the only animals on this planet that have sex for fun are humans, dolphins, and who else is that? Some primates. Some monkeys or something, and that's it. There's nobody else that does it. It's all done for a reason to further the species, and nothing more. And these are usually done at particular times, while the human species is in a constant state of sexual psychotic cravings. And that's exactly what it is. So these psychotic cravings, particularly from the testosterone-driven males, does absolutely nothing for you in life, in feeling good, experience. It does absolutely nothing. The overrated results from the compulsive sexual orgasms is pathetic of what you can get and lasts a very short periods of time. And even if you expand the length of sexual activity and even orgasm to whatever minor extent that is, it's just another worthless drug that produces worthless effects, that produces nothing for gnosis or higher consciousness or does anything for you. So unless you're a prostitute and getting paid for it, there is no positive results from sexuality that I can see unless it's a business. And of course then you're suckering somebody else and giving them false sexuality. So the point is that in making it mechanical and boring and everything else. So the whole idea is that you may get some money out of it, and but nobody really walks away satisfied. So the whole idea is that it's important to get this in your consciousness. And as you get older, maybe you understand this. The problem is that sexuality is a compulsion. You do anything to have it. You take any risk, including your life, others, your entire life. You will ruin everything. There are people who are compulsively driven to have sex that are pedophiles, that are bestialities. Every possible sexual perversion is there. And that's built into the human species to control and depower them, as so many other things are. So this whole energy here, if you want to destroy a civilization of people who have great potential, you make them warlike and sex driven. And of course, adding in the compulsion of eat. So you're killing, raping, and robbing and killing everything on the planet to eat it while you're trying to fuck it at the same time. So, I mean, this is really important to get through people's heads, and it's almost a little tiresome subject of this people and their sacred sexuality, and the perverse Indians and the problematic Chinese who have to kill rhinoceroses because only 1.5 billion Chinese aren't enough, so they need to massacre animals for fictitious energy things so that they can have better manhoods. All of these things are ridiculous, especially with the advent of now sexually performance drugs that are out there that easily and now even inexpensively allow you to maintain that psychotic need that males have, constantly being apparently hard. So the whole idea is that these types of things certainly do absolutely nothing to empower you, to help you in life. And if decisions are being made based on, and people are always, pretty people are helped in different areas. It's like being rich. People think that, if you help a rich person, that somehow some bills are going to fall out of their pockets that you can then get on your knees and scoop up from the rich people. I've seen this so often, and it's that psychotic trickle down theory. Let's make the rich richer so that they throw a few pennies our way. Ronnie Reagan was for that. That psychotic who was pretty much not in his right mind for most of his last 30 years of life, including when he was president, and then tripled the national budget, but was a conservative. And over 300 of his cabinets were indicted for legal problems of being crooks. But, he's the great daddy. So the whole idea is that the realities out there of all this, of trying to use these energies for anything, to think that sexual fluids, which Aleister Crowley, of course, loved to eat, and thought that this gave him great power. I guess that with a couple of shots of heroin really got you high. A little cum eating, a little heroin. Yeah, he was immortal. And had a success rate less than the average idiot. Matter of fact, he had no success rate, from what we can ascertain from Aleister Crowley and his practices, which were all to indulge his sexual and drug-infested sicknesses of his perverted evil mind. We have followed his life carefully with written documentations, and he lost legal cases, he lost everything, he was unable to get he had no success in his life whatsoever. He lived off of money from daddy, and he lived off of kind of idiot, delusional, rich women that he was able to manipulate because, after all, he was rich again. People wanted to be around him because they thought money would come out of his pockets, and he made sure that he never paid for anything, and he made sure that that really never happens. And anybody knows a rich person knows that you're never going to get anything off of them. You're lucky if they offer you a glass of water. So the whole idea is that that kind of low-class stupidity that people want to go into goes into all areas of life. So basically, it's all about getting high, and this is what killed the 60s movement that started off with a lot of good information and continued for a while, but what killed it was sex and drugs, because ultimately that's all it came down to, because that was the only thing you could really physically hang on to in a world of consciousness instead of going to higher levels, because that was really just too difficult. So the whole idea is that how does this? Now, in terms of ultimate reality is that controlling the compulsive sexuality, particularly as a male, or what's even worse in females, if they have the compulsive opposite, which is generally very little to no sexuality after they have their compulsive need to have a child or children, is the major conflict in the actual human species, which causes all. The amount of money that's been spent on all areas of sexuality, positive, negative, and the money that's being spent even now on pornography, from what I've seen figures of, is that more money is spent on pornography than on all the entertainments together. That's sporting events, that's movies. You put all those together, the record industry, and more money is spent on that. So it shows you just how shocking all this is. And that's just in that one area. If we start adding in all the other things connected to sexuality, positive or negative, toys, outfits, whatever else that goes in the other picture of that, we're talking about a huge amount of time spent for what? What exactly does sexuality get you? And really, well, let's really examine that. Now, it's a compulsion that, particularly with the testosterone-driven males, that is almost impossible to transcend. And what does it have to get you? We have going on 8 billion people, and they claim that we will have 10 billion people in the next 30 or 40 years, which at the current birth rates, considering we've got half the world starving, nobody's making enough money, there isn't enough clean water, but it doesn't seem to stop the infectious human scum from continuing to populate on a planet which they will rape and destroy down to the very last person. The second largest business in the world after criminal drug sales, which is basically drug sales in general, which are the largest business on the planet, which is everything to do with criminality, of course. There's really no difference between the three street thugs and the criminals and the corporations who the thugs control. But the second largest business after drugs is people and sexuality. And so people, enslavement, sex slaves, etc., which is huge business that is done all around the world, where they have rape houses that people go to and that are all over the nice little Western world and are frequented by all types of affluent and non-affluent people. So we need to understand that that's a big, big business. So it's just more and more to trying to figure out what exactly that is. And what does it really do? You know, we keep breeding and breeding and breeding for what particular reason? I mean, the whole idea is while certain species are struggling to survive because of the encroachment of humans, humans are having to be forced not to have children, no matter how poor they are. And there is a factor of the of reality is that, you know, the poorer you are, the more children you need, because you need a bunch of hands to help you make money to survive, particularly in your old age. And to a certain extent, that even is true in Western societies. Of course, we've overcome this by the offering of pensions and Social Security, where people can survive without their children taking care of them. So what is the purpose of human breeding? Well, obviously you want to sustain a culture, or do you? I mean, quite frankly, some people think that only 500 million people should be on the entire planet. The point is sustaining a culture of what and for what? So the whole idea is to think that anyway, and of course there seems to be a problem, particularly with white upper middle class women who, of course, wait too long to have babies because they were so busy having a career that they have trouble having children and have to have artificial insemination and so many other things that a certain class, and it particularly seems to be Western white women, seem to have. Doesn't seem to be a problem with the Hispanics. So, so the whole idea is that what does it serve? I mean, basically, when you have sex, all sorts of things is happening in your biochemical makeup of your body. All sorts of hormones and chemicals and all sorts of things are released. And to be quite frank, none of these things are very positive. I mean, as known with most males, after orgasm, basically you're flooded with sleep energies. And I don't quite understand why that is. You think you would be more hyped up to be in a more protective mode if you're thinking primitive, of now having to protect what possibly is the generation of a life form that you need to have come to fruition. But that isn't the case at all. And of course, the compatibility of the two sexes is not even there. You have people who, the males who want to have sex every second of the day. It's not unusual for males in general to masturbate 6 to 8 times a day. While a female, it may be 6 to 8 times a week if they're young. And generally, there's no sexual comparison. And of course, these are general things, and I don't want to hear from people saying all this nonsense, particularly women that want to say how sexual they are. It's boring, it's a lie, and understand what you are and how your sexuality works. Yes, I've met a lot of very sexual women, and they were as nutty as a box of frogs. And I could actually go on and list endless hours of trivial nonsense of the nut jobs that so-called sexual women are. But let's not get into that particular issue, which I could spend hours speaking on, extrapolating on the other part of it. And then, of course, you have men who just want to screw all the time anywhere. It's beer, pizza, and porno, and that's the reality that most men live in, and that's, of course, why nothing ever gets going. So there certainly is no positive balance between either of those. Oh, and by the way, the most sexual women are those that are in mental institutions where they have to give women anti-sexuality drugs to control them because they want to fuck all the time because they're in the loony bin. So you can see how that actually correlates to all of this, while it's considered standard sexuality for a male. So the whole idea is that and let's talk about this. Sexuality is nothing more than a compulsion that serves no purpose whatsoever after propagating the species. And, generally it seems to me that the people who are smarter, have money, don't have very many children. You go to wealthy communities and there's huge houses and they have 1 or 2 kids and they have 8 bedrooms. You go to poor communities, they have 2 bedrooms and they have 10 kids. So the whole idea is that there's no balance there whatsoever again. And so we run into all these problems. How does this, in general, equate into the occult sciences? And how can you use these energies? Well, in general, these energies are something that you have to highly control. Now, throughout all of our lives, and because of the poor opportunities and the problematic situations and not having really a free sexual society where people can take care of these compulsions, which would be very fulfilling, particularly in the Western or United States, all the efforts to legalize prostitution, things which would take the pressure off of females in society who are not really interested in sex, and it would help assist the male who has to release regardless of where, when, and how, causes a very uptight and problematic society with all sorts of very serious problems, which is why we have so much incest and so much sexual misconduct. When the psychotic sexuality energy takes over, you will do all sorts of inappropriate things that to fulfill that need, regardless of the dire effects of it. So it's an evil compulsion to have sex with little to no benefit other than a release of endorphins, which for physical acts and doing things is a high amount of relief, because after all, that's how you're addicted to it. It's an addiction. It's a compulsion. You want to get those endorphins running again so you feel that. But, these things don't last very long. I mean, in terms of if somebody was going to tell you they were going to give you some pleasure for a few seconds or a couple of minutes, and there are all these dangers and problems with it, including the fact of getting diseases that are extremely painful and will kill you, that the offset of this could be a responsibility of having children that don't disappear, that you have to take care of for at least 18 years if you just want to look at it legally. But that's not the case at all. If you're a parent, you should be a parent to the day you die. So the point is that this is a responsibility that you have. This is not a toy you get. And like people who tend to get dogs and pets as toys, as Christmas presents, then they get the rude reality of that, this is something you have to take care of all the time. So what purpose does it have in the magical world? And I can tell you right now, there's no purpose whatsoever. While your mind is changing and thinking of sex every 6 seconds, males, what exactly you're having, that means your concentration levels and everything else that is going around is now zapped. So instead of concentrating on manifesting that, whatever that is in life, that certainly is more solid than some passing orgasm, whether that's a cashmere sweater or a nicer car or a better job or reading and finish a book, you spent your time in the worthless land of sitcom reality, the total worthless experience you have after that because it's a dead zone. So there's certainly almost anything is better than wasting your time with sexuality and the paraphernalia that comes with that. So, depending on your level of centeredness, then you are able to control this. Now, the problem is that we live in a society, and if you're have a partner, whether you're gay or straight, there are certain needs and situations, and part of a relationship is to have that. And that there has to be a proper balance struck there, and we are a society that is geared towards sex all the time, or at least being sexy. It's really not sex. People like to, particularly with what you see on TV is everybody flashing everything, sticking this out, and giant asses and giant everything else, and wearing provocative dresses. But at the end of the night, that's how women get off, and there ain't no physical contact with that. While men see it as a preamble to sexual contact, women see it as a sexual way of operating, and that takes care of their needs. So the whole idea is, here we go again with this circle, and people, I think that most, as the old cliche is that women marry for security, men marry for sex, and the whole idea is having this particular. What a stupid way to get married, and what a stupid waste of time all that is anyway. And generally, none of that stuff works out very well. And then, of course, there's those that want to screw around, do all sorts of other things, and have constant sexual. For what particular reason? Again, it's interesting that most of society is brought up, Western society in particular, but in general, this is around the world, that what is your ideal hero that has been perpetrated, particularly in movies? Well, in many aspects, and which is a universal macho image, would be James Bond. And what is James Bond? Now, of course, this has changed over the years, and they've made him light and fluffy. But basically, and of course, everybody thinks that Sean Connery is James Bond's they like the best as a general rule, which I disagree with. But the bottom line is that the movies were very different then. Those were the early 60s. And but in where they had a very different thing. I mean, basically, James Bond is an assassin, horn dog. All he's doing is screwing everything he can and killing everything he can. based on some fake morality that he's doing it for the coin. The German queen that runs the British country. So the whole idea is that under some false morality that, if your mission is good, it means it doesn't matter who you kill and it doesn't matter who you fuck. An endless, I'm not sure what guys that think they have one girl after another think they have actually tried, and if there's any difference. I mean, all cats are gray in the dark. So the point is that this kind of nonsense of having this childlike thing, and this is what you're supposed to do. And of course, in the male world, it's about how many different people you're with for what apparent reason. Why? Well, I was able to do what? For what? What did it do? So you spent a whole lot of time, money, pursuing people, doing things that got you what in life? I don't quite understand any of that. And as an occult scientist, you should be seeing pulling the covers away from and seeing the foul nothingness that this reality has to offer. So, the problem is that abstention, otherwise known as celibacy, is not really an alternative because of the psychotic problems, this psychotic need, this compulsion, this uncontrollable compulsion cannot be given up entirely. We see this with so many different institutions that if there's any institution that requires celibacy, you can guarantee there ain't no celibacy going on. There's just a lot of homosexuality going on, whether they're nuns or priests or anything else. And we've seen this, that they're so compulsive to have sex. And of course, we see the instances where, and are known with the lawsuits, with the horrible, evil Black Lodge church known as the Catholic Church, where they're molesting hundreds of thousands, and it must be millions of children have been molested by these people who are in a state of celibacy, a divine state of celibacy, because they want to be like most likely their mentor, Jesus, who quite possibly and seems to be homosexual. After all, it says that he loved John the Apostle. He didn't love any of the other apostles? Well, why was it loved? Yeah, we know what he loved John the Apostle for. And of course, they want to cover up with Magdalene and everybody else and all these little fantasy stories with that quaint little perverse stories that we get out of the Bible and all the other trashy crotch religions that come out of the Middle East. So the whole idea is that this kind of nonsense doesn't work. Now, so you need to have sexual outlets, and these depend upon your time, your age, and your situations. The point is having control over these things. So males need to orgasm. They need to have a sexual release. But, if a male is released frequently enough, I don't know any person who has frequent sex, even with the most boringest partner, that generally seeks out or causes sexual problems, because those come from people who generally don't have any sexual outlets. Everything becomes a fetish. And there's not a single thing in life that the males haven't fetished. From bicycle seats to panties, everything is a fetish because of unresolved sexual problems, meaning that they are unfulfilled. This turns into incest, pedophilia, on and on and on, are all unfulfilled sexual desires. So generally, if someone is fulfilled, they're not looking for affairs, they're not interested in their children, they're not interested in other people's children. All of these things have to do with unfulfilled sex. And of course, there are nut jobs and perverts and deviants and all things. Generally, they're called bankers in the real world. But in sexual world, there's all these things. So if we're going to have a sick, polluted society, it certainly is going to be in the one area that is so exploited. So people do the most horrible things in the name of, obviously, religion, and closely behind that, or actually ahead of that, is in terms of sexuality. And of course, we see this time and time again. Now, a recent incident that comes to my mind is the subway spokesman, who, from what I understand, and of course, you don't know all the full studies, and I haven't really looked into it in depth. As I said, I don't have time to look into everything. I have to take brief information, note it, and check into it at a surface level. But the subway spokesman, Jared, who everyone probably knows if you're from America, who lost, 100 pounds, hundreds of pounds by eating Subway sandwiches, recently got into all sorts of trouble with underage children. Supposedly, I think, child pornography, a few other things that were not just sexual misconduct. They started to get into that extreme area, and all for what? So, this guy had nothing. He was a big fat slob who somehow, and I don't know what the rig went on there, but he somehow got in as spokesman. I don't know if this was planned. Most likely it was. But he was big and fat and to be able to lose weight, and the subway spokesman has been for 15, 20 years. And then he starts off, his marriage, which a guy like him is very lucky to find anybody, because being a fat loser, having nothing, having no education, having no career, had all this given to him, and had quite a, he's paid probably millions of dollars a year as a spokesman. I can pretty much guarantee that. Got himself a nice house, had a nice lifestyle, and a pretty easy life in general. What do? Go around to subways and make personal appearances and sign, subway bags. So the whole idea is a pretty nice thing, and he threw this all away for some momentary, virtually seconds of pleasure of the release of the chemicals in the brain. But of course, there's a build-up to that. It's like most things in life, it's the build-up. But of course, then you spend all your time in this psychotic formation of sexual fantasies, and what does that get you in life? Well, there's very little or very few people, unless you're in a sex business, making porno, whatever it is, being a prostitute, where you make any money for occultism, so, from sexual practices like that. So the whole idea is that how does that help you as the average person? It helps you with nothing, and it gives you nothing. Plain and simple. So his entire life he threw down the drain because of that. Because of the sexual compulsion that led from one thing after another, that he was. This is not something you choose to do. There may be a lot of criminal acts that people take time and think about doing, robbing people, committing a whole bunch of different types of crimes. Tends to be very planned, and you're measuring the rewards against the dangers. Now, when it comes to anything sexual, you've got to do it, you got to do it now. There's no rationality about it, and this goes on and on with everybody. People that have unprotected sex, people that are so hyper and forced to have quickie sex because they have to get away from their situations they don't have. Instead of making things easy for teenagers where you should and help them develop their sexuality, they're forced into cars and toilets in their homes and quick things while parents are gone. When parents should make time for the fact that your child wants to have sex tonight and needs to have sex, and you should give them the house and let them use it for as long as they need it in a comfortable situation. And so they don't have to rush through things. So they think about birth control. So they think about protection. And don't say, well, I got to get off quick and fast in the back of the car here, slapping on a condom and breaking or not having one and saying, well, forget about it. So the whole idea is this happens all the time. The amount of people that have unprotected sex out there now is staggering. And the amount of social diseases are unbelievably high, even past. And AIDS and everything else isn't gone. It's still out there and out there strong in many communities. So the point is that all of these things are, and I'm gonna get into the actual occult science of the liquids transferred, the energy transferred of sexuality and everything else as well. So I'm going to get into the more occult sciences things, but as an understanding, this is a compulsion that people risk their lives every day. So people that have unprotected sex because they're so hot and horny and have to orgasm, even if that kills you. So theoretically, you're saying, well, I'm going to put this gun to my head and I'm going to kill myself, and my reward is the fact that I get to have a sexual orgasm that lasts at the peak maybe a few seconds. So, and this is not, and it goes on and on with the sexual misconduct that people are involved on at every level. And people destroy their entire lives and their entire careers. And yet it's going on like crazy. People don't understand that, the minute you get convicted of any, quote, sex crime, and that could be, and of course, there's all the ridiculous laws we have and the laws of consent that people are, which are basically the law of sexual consent now in most states and around the world is 16, which seems to be relatively practical. Japan is 14. Which is probably a more practical age in this day and age. But, there's also statutory rape and all these other things. So if you're a 16-year-old and you have sex with another 16-year-old, that's statutory rape, and you can be labeled a sex criminal. And that means for the entire rest of your life, you are registered as a sex offender. This happens, and happens a lot more than you think it does, people. So the whole idea goes on and on with these things, is that the abuses of all these systems, because the copies need jobs and easy victims to put on their reports to act like they're doing something. The courts need money to keep themselves busy, and the lawyers and everybody else who feed off of it. It's an industry, and I keep telling people that everything's an industry, and then you have the problems of when you base life on that about. So this psychotic compulsion that you will do anything to fulfill it is one of the ultimate curses of mankind. And the time and money spent on these areas that could be spent on other areas is just staggering. And of course, anytime you get into any of these bigger industries, even when you legalize prostitution, is that it's still controlled by organized crime because the police work with them and get paid off. So it's always a problem there. But, when you start getting into societies where there is legalized prostitution, it's amazing how the social climate changes and how things like dating start to end. Because after all, if you want to spend $100 or go and take somebody to an expensive dinner, well, you could pay a prostitute $50, and why bother doing that? The point is, you're paying for that person. And, I do like that philosophy. I think that's the way it should be. And I don't think that males who are constantly victimized for their sexuality by being exploited is unbelievable. So, all in all, this is something that is not part of occultism. It's part of taming, just like, and this is all part of the infected mind, that sick, evil mind that tells you to do all sorts of things. The sick, evil mind. And of course, what's very interesting is that your sexual areas in the brain are right next to, guess what? Your violence. So, sex and violence is directly connected as brain empowerment areas. And there's irrefutable things, which is why most people heighten sexuality, or a lot of people heighten sexuality with semi-violent things, whether that is, and of course these are not where people are physically hurting each other, except for in bad porno movies. That's why people are into so much B&D, S&M, and all these other things, which the general person, and this could be anything as sublime as wearing a blindfold, to being tied to a bed, to heavy whipping or other things, depending on this. And these generate all sorts of higher chemicals, because sex is not enough. And here we get back to it all again. So basically, it's an area where you cannot dismiss it, and if you spend your life trying to be celibate, all that does is pervert you even worse. So you have to have a certain amount of sexual release that you are then complacent with sexuality. And this is difficult because, when it comes to males, they want to have sex 3 to 5 times a day. And if you're lucky, if you get a female, that is up to once a day or once a week. So these are the problems, and this causes conflict, and these conflicts cause all sorts of problems after that. But sexuality should be dealt with what it is. It should be dealt with like it's food. And food you need to eat to survive, and you need to have sex to survive, and you need to find the outlets that take care of that. Now, the problem with all those things is obviously I don't see anything very positive in paying for sex. It's a cheap, crappy life. It's the lowest level of fast food. It's a fast food restaurant with a D for cleanliness. It's just a terrible way, and I don't think anybody gets much out of it. Of course, males get out of it because in the end, it's just a certain amount of it's like screwing a plastic doll. It's better than nothing. But it certainly is far from the realm of being fulfilled. But if you're heavily into sexuality and it controls your life, again, you become a Charlie Sheen drug, sex, compulsive person, and it does absolutely nothing for you. So celibacy is not really. But of course, you should, and particularly as you get through your domination phases, as you go into your late 30s and so forth, you should be dramatically decreasing your amount of sexual contact because it doesn't assist you. The point is that when it comes to occult sciences, there's also a lot of things happening with orgasm and sexuality in general. And what's very interesting is that, there's all sorts of energies that are created by and transferred through sexuality. So sex is very draining, very debilitating when you are masturbating. When you have a sex partner, it is not. Why is that? It's the same act. It is not the same act because you are actually drawing from not only the cosmos, but a uniting energy with your partner that is empowering and balancing you, which you don't get when you have masturbation. Masturbation causes the opposite. It fatigues you, it drains you. And since this is the primary activity of almost all males, they are tired. And not only that, it creates violent energies. When you masturbate, your inner consciousness rejects that act, and it makes you very angry and violent in general, and in particular to women. So masturbation is very bad generally, but unfortunately a necessity. And the more you masturbate, the more enraged and hateful you become. These chemicals are produced that way. And what's very interesting is that, there used to be, some people used to say, particularly with teenagers, is that who have terrible skin problems, is, there was an old saying that you need to fuck those pimples away. And we all know that those people with pimples and then were adolescents were not abstaining from sex. At least they were not abstaining from masturbation. And masturbation makes skin problems much, much worse, and I think actually causes it. But in some mysterious way, when these teenagers start to have intercourse, the amount of skin breakouts are dramatically reduced and in many cases disappear because of a transfer of a particular type of energy. I mean, sex is made for a transfer of energy in an occult science format, but even in life it's a transfer of energy. It's a unique type of energy. It's not an energy that can be used directly through orgasms and concentrating on that. When you orgasm, this is the typical sex magic thing, is you concentrate on something as you orgasm, and that it doesn't work. The fact that people think that there's some magical energy either in male semen or female sexual fluids, and when you combine these two, like Aleister Crowley thought so much and made him into a freak, that there was something special about that. But he wrote an entire diary of how he thought that this special elixir was doing something for him. Does absolutely nothing, doesn't produce any results, and I follow this closely because these are all things that males are interested in more than normally. And secondly, is there something there? Because certainly would be a fun way to generate and manifest things in life. It doesn't work, it is worthless, and it is simple as that. So, the actual reality of using sexual energies as a joke. And of course, you'll get out of India in particular the psychotic compulsion to either orgasm all the time or to be, which is called the left-hand path, or the right-hand path, which is considered sexual celibacy. So people are under the misconception that Tantra somehow means screwing and orgasming, when it generally, as a general rule, it's about non-orgasming, even though having high states of arousal, meaning you're pulling in all this energy that you then use somewhere else. And it's the best thing to do is Qi Kung, which will generate these energies and bring them to you, instead of doing it in this fashion where it doesn't serve you any purpose and there's a lot of dangers. I mean, it's very hard to find people that are socially compatible and sexually compatible. I mean, really, people need to have a sex partner relationship, and they need to have a wife or partner relationship in general. Generally, the two don't mix, and I've never seen people that are really happy, because usually the sexual needs of people are quite different, and that's an area which is such a compulsion, something you must have. That needs to be fulfilled, but it's most likely not necessarily going to be the person that you want to spend your life with. As I've mentioned, all my experiences with the highly sexed is that they're great for sex and ain't great for anything else. They're nuts. Fruits and nuts. So the whole idea is that if you had a sexual relation with them, which is, hey, let's have sex, right? Bye, huh? Let's have something to eat, and mama, okay, bye. I have to go back to my real life, would work better. And I think it would work better for the women as well, who have those problems as well. But so these are all part of understanding the bigger picture. So this transfer of energy, which actually has a curative amount, actually is there. Your body is fighting this, producing all these chemicals, which are then caught in your skin, giving you all these outbreaks, giving you a huge amount of oily skin and other things which sexuality causes. The great fatigue, then chronic fatigue, is directly linked to sexual practices. So the whole idea is all these things are happening through sexual contact. And it's very, very complicated, and nobody really talks about that. If you go to doctors, they enjoy it, those little cretin assholes that know nothing. So the whole idea is that there is a huge amount to sexuality and the common practices that people use. And casual sex and all the things that go into that. So the point is that there's this whole energy that you suck in cosmically and through the uniting of these yin and yang forces. And it's quite obvious in every it also appears to be that homosexuals, which have even a greater sexual craving, if that's even hard to believe, even define themselves with it. Well, who are you? I'm Bill. I'm gay. Oh, I didn't ask you who you fuck. I asked you who you are. So they define their entire lives like that. How boring can that be? It's one soap opera after another with most gays, and it's quite boring, their lives, and they achieve very little. And, they're so easily emotional children and corrupted that, it makes that entire way of functioning that really is a sad state of being. So you don't define yourself by your sexuality. You define yourself of who you are a being, what you've done in the world, for the world, and how you evolve. And that has absolutely nothing to do with whether you're gay or not gay or straight or anything else. And like everything else in the world, there are good people and there are bad people. And that has absolutely nothing to do with sexual orientation, race, or anything else. So you have to choose in life whether you're going to be good or bad. And you have to then and throwing sex in there and defining yourself by your sexuality is ridiculous. I mean, imagine if you went to a party and you talked to everybody else, and basically, generally people ask you, what do you do? Or people should hand out business cards. I fuck women. That's what I am. I mean, what is this crap nonsense? It really, really annoys me. So the whole idea is that that is not that is part of your sexuality. I didn't ask what your sexuality was. I asked who you were as a person. And if you define yourself by your sexuality, it just shows you how out of control, particularly male sexuality is, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. So it's pretty pathetic. So there's these energies exchanges which are very important, particularly through puberty and the development of your occult bodies, that you have a positive partner where you swap the yin and yang energies at a very deep level. Because we're made up of yin and yang energies, otherwise known as male and female, and by swapping these energies, you empower yourself. Women tend to be empowered by it and get male energies, which they desperately need since they're such weak species that is so fearful of confrontation, while males want to fight everywhere and cause all sorts of problems, and they need a female balancing there. So this causes a great stability in the consciousness. And so taking teenagers and not allowing them to have sex is the worst possible thing you could possibly do, and then causing more problems by making them have to do things on the sly, where they're stressed, where they don't take time to use protection and birth control, causes all these kinds of problems, and people get pregnant. And, because, to be careful, just to be a little bit, have safe sex, and to be careful not pregnancies, because some people take pills and not. And of course, the only real good way is to take a birth control pill, because condoms are very unreliable, break all the time, come off. And if you're horny and young, condoms are very unreliable. So they're better than nothing, but the chance of pregnancy is huge, because the nature of condoms, which, like most everything else made in life, is not very good. So one of the reasons why society is so messed up is we've decided that you have to get married to have sex with someone that is more of a companion than a sex partner, and by causing problems throughout the youth to stagnate these consciousness combining male-female energies so they operate in a more logical fashion in the rest of their life, is all thrown down the tube through a bunch of stupidity and belief systems, particularly perpetrated by ignorant parents who many whom were sluts and assholes through their entire life, and then want to play monkey with their children, that their children have to live some perverse lifestyle that they don't at all. And of course, if you've ever had divorced parents, you see how they turn into the biggest sluts and whores that are out there after they get divorced. All of a sudden they can fuck around, but you're too young to do that. What does age have to do with any of it? So the whole idea is that this causes so many occult science problems. So if you were lucky enough to have an open and free sexuality through your teenage years, you're going to be a much more balanced person and a much more occult empowered person. And that transfer of energies, the stopping of the skin conditions, the stopping of the buildup of fatigue energies within the male body from the constant masturbation, which releases fatigue energies, which serve no purpose whatsoever except make you tired and think slow and everything else. Apparently, that's what nature wants to give you after orgasm, and particularly after self-orgasm. I don't know, maybe they want to make you stupider so you don't find anyone because you can't find a partner or manifest a partner. So the whole idea is to make you as stupid and as angry as possible so you continue not to, because I guess you're not a strong enough person. It almost appears like that as these things go. That also brings into the idea of, there certainly is no empowering or sustaining energy from getting involved in casual and multi-partner sex, or, quote, the swinging lifestyle. There you're picking up too many diverse energies. It's being literally injected in you, or you are injecting, depending on whom you are. And this transfer of energy from random people who have no consciousness whatsoever in multiple amounts does not fulfill that exchange of energy that needs to be done. It actually causes another negative area, because you're dealing with a whole bunch of people with a lot of bad energies and a lot of hang-ups, and now you're taking that in. If you're dealing with one partner that you have some sort of relationship with and can confine your energies to that particular person and transfer and take energies from that one particular partner, you get a much more. Now, this doesn't mean you only have one partner, whether that's a partner, as I said, it's very unlikely that your mate is going to be compatible in that area. But it also doesn't mean that you have to limit yourself to, quote, one affair, so to speak. But casual or group sex is negative, and you're transferring a lot of very bad energies. So as an occult scientist, you certainly don't want to do that. If you want to balance your energy, you want to keep more balanced, you want to tap into the male or the female, depending on whom you are, in this joining of energies, that certainly is very productive and good for you on that level, and also takes care of that compulsion of having to have sex. And you know, the problem with everything, it's like drugs and everything else. If you have an unfulfilled sex life, as I said, it goes into all sorts of deviant behaviors. Masturbation, you have to generally increase because it's such a voyeuristic viewpoint, particularly with males who are all visually oriented. Then you get into unusual or different sex practices, which I don't believe there are any good or bad sex practices. Whatever you get off on is whatever you get off on. It really doesn't matter. The point is that most of that stuff with most people, particularly if they're masturbating as their main outlet, are going to be viewing and getting involved in things that tend to be more and more extreme or a little more weird, because it's pretty hard to get off on common sexual intercourse. So you're going to have different variants of that. Again, we get into the fetishes, and pretty much all of these are not a problem unless they're what's considered a deviant behavior, which is getting involved with any basically the only negative sex practices are non-consensual, meaning animals, children, and the mentally insane or retarded cannot consent. So those are evil practices. So if you're doing things and you're the only consenter and everybody else is indirectly being exploited or forced into it, or they don't know any better, then that is evil practices. But everything else is really up in the air. I mean, whether you're into whatever it is, and it's amazing how sexuality has gone from this very hidden area. I remember when I grew up, and I'm not that old, of how Playboy was thought of as this kind of nasty crap magazine. And the worst was that damn Larry Flint's magazine, Hustler. That was filthy, because they had clear shots of the vagina, and that was just disgusting. And you couldn't even get these things. I mean, it was difficult to even get sexual things. They were only in pornographic stores. People, or children particularly, were chastised, as most guys would have little hordes of Playboy magazines and so forth, which couldn't be any more tamer. I mean, it is the naked human body. What's the problem with it? You are expected to be, and vilified if you're not, to be a sexual, particularly a heterosexual male. Why would there be a problem for you expressing yourself in that? And what's wrong with that? So that kind of deep-seated religion-based psychotic illness of demonizing sexuality has caused a lot of different problems. But we went from these things to the point that it is all magazines, I don't know, about 10 years ago, went hardcore, meaning they went from just showing graphic nudity to actual showing intercourse and so forth. And of course, this was all stemmed by the fact of our technologies. The reason why we have so many computer and other technologies now is not for the business uses, but because of the fact of the sexual uses, particularly the development of computers and DVDs and all these other things and the VHS tapes. All of these industries grew not because you could get movies for $80, but you could get sex tapes. So, society is very much based on these things, and something very important to actually understand. So, But it's amazing how in the last 20 years we've went from this horrible Playboy and these dastardly hustler magazines into every possible form of sexuality you can view online any time of day, 24/7. You can view almost anything you desire online and for free. And sex products always used to be magazines, etc. Always used to be expensive, even the more. Now Playboy is now not even featuring nudity anymore because it's kind of ridiculous. People either like the HMM magazines, which are kind of naughty little shorts, or they want down and dirty stuff. They don't want to just see somebody's tits and ass. They either want that covered up of celebrities or more provocative things, which are kind of titillating in themselves. Kind of like people who like to go to R-rated movies or read, 50 Shades of Grey. They want to live in this non-direct kind of baby world. And then there are those that, it's kind of ridiculous to read 50 Shades of Grey when you can tune into your free local porn site where you can see all of it in graphic detail for free. I don't know the kind of, the rationalization of these kind of people. It used to be in the 70s and 80s, they had, everything you always wanted to know about sex. That was a revolutionary book. And Alex Comfort's book, The Joy of Sex, which actually showed illustrations of sexual positions and so on. This was groundbreaking, and this was all in the 70s. And then all of a sudden, here we are now. And we have every possible type of graphic sex available online for free 24/7. So, and I believe this is done deliberately because it keeps you busy doing nothing while the controllers are controlling you. So, from people who used to get off on all sorts of different things because there was absolutely nothing out there now to the most. And, these sex sites have everything on them. So it's not like the fact that you're seeing typical sexuality. And it's not like you're seeing the illegal or perverse or deviant sex either. Because I guess that's out there if you want to search for it. But, I'm always amazed how there apparently seems to be a whole bunch of pedophiles. Or, of course, they seem to want to tell you there is. But I've never heard anybody express that interest. In terms of younger people, there seems to be, and that's part of just the jungle type mentality that younger is prettier and better. Things that are not sagging tend to be more attractive to people. And of course, that's a personal thing that seems to be built into the human consciousness as well. But that doesn't mean children, which I think is quite a bit different. And I've never heard anybody say they like to see children having sex. But whatever, apparently that's out there, and there's so many other things out there. But I mean, you can pretty much on these open sex sites, there's every possible form of sex that you could desire is shown there. And right next to all the regular heterosexual pornography is the homosexual pornography. So it's not exactly that type of isn't hidden either. So it's all there, but unless you're a person who's over 40, you probably don't understand the kind of hidden sexuality that was out there that caused so many problems. And I said it's amusing that people would think at any time or any stage of life, and the harassments that Hustler magazine went through, and Playboy in particular, being this basically showing nudity, went under, is just staggering. So to think that there's something wrong with nudity, and particularly the way Playboy, an extremely tasteful way of doing it, boringly so, is just shocking that these were things that were coveted. Oh, it's just terrible stuff. You shouldn't have it. And Playboy always was kind of a really good magazine. And, in years past, I used to get it for the old cliche for the articles. Actually, they do have a lot of good articles in Playboy and a lot of interesting things to talk about clothing and drink and unusual products and interviews with celebrities. And actually, it's a very good people-type magazine. With the added bonus of some very beautiful women in there. Of course, there were also very unattainable beautiful women. And of course, I don't know how many, and I will give you the secret of Playboy and the Playboy Mansion and all those things that people hear about. One of the many secrets that nobody talks about, and in general, and I've known people who have been there, both men and women, and the empire that he built, which was basically to make people more sexually open, and particularly women, was nothing more than a giant whorehouse. And this has been documented even on a TV show called TMZ, who, after one night of reveling at the Playboy Mansion, followed a bus that left there, full of black hookers who then were taken to downtown LA and got off the bus and got into their different pimps' cars, because that's what the Playboy Mansion was. It's a giant whorehouse. And those women who get their deals there are expected to contribute 10% of their money to go towards the food that is provided there, which is relatively fancy. The shrimps, the lobsters, the steaks, and all that. So the whole idea of you think you're going to the Playboy Mansion and you're going to meet women who are sexually liberated is the complete fallacy at all. It's a giant whorehouse, and nobody gives it away free. So the illusion that the Playboy lifestyle and that the female is going to be somehow moved into a free sexual environment happened in a very small period of the 60s, and was soon gone. The conservative values that were very apparent in the 70s in my lower middle class high school in the suburbs of Los Angeles were far from hippie or free sex, and there was hardly any of that going on other than the usual few stoners, as that they're called in high school, that used to smoke at a pot all the time. But other than that, there certainly wasn't any of that going around. And that attitude, which maybe their parents had, but you got to remember that it wasn't really the parents that were sexually free in the 60s and 70s. It was their children, and those people didn't have children yet. But mostly those people didn't portray those values anymore. They went back to the monkish attitudes of self-torture. So, all of life is an illusion, and this is one of the major problems in life. And the whole idea is, what do you do about that in terms of the bigger picture? So, as an occult science, there is, as I've said, this energy transfer between the yin and yang energy, which is very critical in your teenage years, and it is an assistant through the rest of your life. So, the actual sexual contact with a partner, which doesn't necessarily have to be your mate or the someone you're living with, most likely, as all general relationships like that, women after they reach pretty much their late 30s don't have much interest in that. So you have to find somebody that does, which is the reason why most men, and you'll see in Hollywood, once they reach 50, they divorce the 50-year-old wife and they get a 20-year-old, and that's pretty much, when it comes to sexuality, that's how the comparisons work. So that would be the ideal relationship if it's something you can use. Using sex workers is really not positive. Again, they have 50 other customers just that day, and you're bringing in those energies. So it's not a good way to get yourself off. So it is not positive. Casual swing clubs, again, you've got the same thing. It's just free hookers. Or otherwise known as sluts, and you're getting all these energies there. So while all that may seem fun and attractive, and it may be something that you experiment with for short periods of your life, and I'm not sure if that is a problem, if you're thinking about higher occult science practices, those are not good. The same thing is with any type of masturbation, which is really bad for you because of what I've just said. It's draining. It produces hostilities. It's really bad for you, but it's generally something that is not a problem if you're doing it at infrequent occasions, no more than once a day, and as you get older and so forth, you should try and keep that down to as little as possible. But total Celibacy, as he said, will cause other conflicts in with you. So unless you can channel those sexual energies somewhere else, you're going to bottle it up, and that's going to turn into perversion. So you have to release it, and if masturbation is the only way of releasing it, then that's what you have to do. Plain and simple. And what I've talked about here is true for both sexes. I mean, if you are having a negative relationship with someone and you're a woman, you're taking in all that. If you're giving it away to somebody for free as a slut that is not fulfilling your needs, well, that's a real problem. Having multiple partners doesn't help you, doesn't do as, I mean, with most women, they're trying to get love somewhere that way or feeling they're wanted. And that doesn't serve any purpose either. It's the same thing with masturbation there. I mean, a woman needs the transfer of the yin energy. I believe that's the male energy. The women need that desperately, just as men desperately need the transfer of female energy to keep themselves balanced. And the reason why people aren't balanced is because they're not having that. It has to be done in a consciousness, caring. I don't know. I don't believe in the term love. It's interesting that we would call sexuality love making, but I don't think they have anything to do with each other. You know, sexuality is a compulsion. It's a physical need, like eating. It's absolutely nothing to do with love whatsoever. And when we confuse love making and sex, it's stupid. And it degrades the so-called greatness of love. So all that is important for the occult scientist to understand. So having that type of a transfer of energy is very critical in your life. And here again, that's not something that you necessarily have to do all that often. Again, it depends on your compulsive stage, and it's something you have to watch. And you shouldn't stay away from things that are stimulating. There's a constant slap in the face of this fake sexuality by people who wear very provocative clothes and commercials, and the thinking that women are like porn sites. These are paid prostitutes that get paid money for this, and it appears to me that most of them aren't doing a very good job either. So the point is, regardless of how some are very good actresses and do well at these things, there's an illusion to somehow then equate that with somehow sexuality. The same thing to quote the Playboy girls and people who were in Playboy when they were interviewed are people that have almost little to no sexual history whatsoever. They're doing it because it's chic, and they're doing it for a big paycheck. So the whole idea is that it doesn't mean sex whatsoever. And Playboy has never really meant sex. It's meant the illusion of sex. As a non-fulfilling thing, no matter how he tried to change that. What ultimately what's interesting is the Playboy empire is nothing more than the reality of the sexuality that was trying to free women, particularly in the 60s, turned nothing more into the old paradigm of prostitute and customer. So that type of activity, the exchanging of the yin and yang energies, as an occult scientist, is highly recommended, and this should be done anytime, basically on your personal needs. It shouldn't be done more than daily, because you are just draining energies past that. You're not assisting it. Masturbation, if it's your only available outlet, is something that you should keep down to a minimum. But it is not good, but it is also not bad, because if you're in a high state of sexual frustration, you're not going to achieve much either. So knocking one out for the team, while it doesn't produce good chemicals, and as you get older and older, it fatigues you more and more in life and drains you. So it is something you want to stay away from in general. And the same thing with casual sex, swingers, whores, etc. All of these is a real problem. So, and as much as some, particularly Indians, want to use the Kundalini energy and so forth, these are just indirectly tied to sexuality. The way these energies are portrayed, particularly in Eastern mysticism and in a lot of the Asian schools, is is they're glorifying this sexual energy. And they somehow say, well, it's the sexual energy that keeps you. No, it is not. That is the byproduct of what's going on. And one of the problems with particularly males when you orgasm is that your body then has to start making all these sexual fluids again. So this is the reason why you tend to be fatigued after sexuality, is because of the fact that you have to make all these things. So it's draining vital force, and it's draining occult energy in particular from you. So the energies you're using for manifesting in magic is the energies that are being drained off to empower your root chakra and to make semen. And this drains the body. And it doesn't seem like it does, but it does. So it's all your energy is in your body now, particularly your inner core energies are going to produce that. So this is the problem, but it is not chi energy. Chi energy is used throughout the body for all sorts of functions, and sexuality is strictly a byproduct, and people give it importance because it's a compulsion. You've got to do it, whether your life is on the line. I'm going to orgasm and then pull the trigger, and that's kill myself. And people do this every day with dangerous sexual practices. They allow their compulsions to take over them and ruin their entire life, like Jared and so many other people who followed their sexual compulsions. And I can guarantee you, not a single one of these people have had fulfilling sex lives. They're all married, they're all in dead relationships, and I can guarantee you they had horrible sex lives. Guaranteed. And of course, people will tell you different. The same thing with people who are molesting their own children and incest situations. I can tell you, day one, they are unsatisfied and their partners are indifferent. So the whole idea is that this is part of this compulsion. So people want to relate chi energy and life force to something that has to do with fucking, and that is fucking nonsense. So chi energy that empowers and you bring in to empower your higher consciousness, your inner magical being, and your ascending body, your quest for the gnosis, the understanding of truth in the world, and the transcending of the ape being, the fucking eating, murdering species that most of who we live with, not the Atlanteans who we are, because we have transcended the ape species. We are not part of them. We are not part of the human race. And it disgusts me when people say they're proud of their particular human heritage, and there is no proud human heritage anywhere in the world, and there certainly ain't from no Western Europeans who seem to want to stand on hills and scream that, when the greatest cultures came from Mesoamerica and South and Central America and from Egypt, and filtered into the only great European societies, which were the Romans and the Greeks, which got all their information from the Egyptians. So the whole idea, who got all their information from the Atlanteans, by the way. So the whole idea is that that kind of low-level mentality, and to thinking that you're going to pop some pills or smoke some, or take some peyote trips, or what is it, ayahuasca now? What do they call it now? It's so popular with the trippy dudes. I saw things and visions, and yeah, it was wonderful. And of course, there's all that kind of trippy thing which involves sexuality to one extent or another. I can guarantee you that. Is a cop-out by the lower self to sabotage yourself and to depower yourself, because there ain't no power in sex and there ain't no power in drugs. They're all big, massive, giant, deep holes that you will fall into. And if you're lucky, very lucky, if you fall into these holes, you will claw your way to the top and maybe get out. But it's going to be the fight of your life. And there's nothing spiritual, there's nothing occult science, there's nothing great in drugs or sexuality whatsoever. They are enslavements, they are compulsions, they're connected to the ape being reality that you are seeking to release yourself from, not climb further in. So with that, as I always say, there is no reality until the occult scientist creates it. Question everything, believe nothing, trust absolutely no one. Learn it, be it, do it, and let the guild be your guide.